It was just a broken glass. A lavender teacup I'd brought with me from the old house. The water was still warm when it slipped from my hands. Shattered against the tile, like a scream I didn't know I'd held inside. I knelt to gather the pieces quietly. A habit formed long ago. Always clean up your own mess. But that night, it wasn't the cup that broke. Melissa's voice cracked like thunder from behind me. "Get out of my kitchen, Mom, you shouldn't even be here." Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands didn't shake. Just her phone screen, glowing like a warning. "One more step and I'm calling the cops." I didn't answer. Didn't argue. I just stood up slowly. And felt the ache in my knees. The kind that comes with time. And silence. She meant it. She really meant it. There was a pause. And then the dialing tone. She was calling. The daughter I once nursed through fevers and first heartbreaks. Now looked at me like a trespasser. I walked past the fridge that still held a magnet with my name on it. Through a hallway lined with family photos. Except none of them showed me anymore. The front door felt heavier than usual. Or maybe it was just my chest. Outside, the air was cold. The kind of cold that doesn't bite. It seeps. I stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the street lamp. The distant bark of a dog across the cul-de-sac. My hands were still shaking. Not from fear. But from the weight of knowing. This was no longer my home. Not even as a guest. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the borrowed bed. Wrapped in the same wool shawl Walter gave me our last Christmas together. And I made a promise. If they wouldn't make space for my memory, I would find a way to protect it. Even if that meant letting go of the house I once called home. Sometimes, the only way to stay whole is to walk away before you're erased completely. When your child calls the cops on you, where do you go to feel human again? The house by the lake never asked much of me. It didn't care if my hands were shaky, or if my knees creaked on the stairs. It welcomed me in silence. The kind that holds you instead of pushing you away. Every corner had a memory. The rocking chair by the window still groaned with the weight of Walter's stories. He used to read to me there, even after the kids had long outgrown fairy tales. The kitchen walls were sun-faded, tracing outlines where framed photos once hung. Not many were left now. Just one, of our wedding day. Walter in a borrowed tux. Me in a tea-length dress I'd sewn myself. I remember the smell of the cedar lining our closets. The dust didn't bother me. It was honest. More honest than the lavender-scented sanitizers Melissa sprayed every Sunday after brunch. That house by the lake didn't hide its age. Neither did I. For a long time, I thought I'd die there. In the same bed where Walter took his last breath. Next to the same window. Where he once whispered, "I'm proud of what we built." Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket over my knees, watching the lake ripple under the morning sun. It was like watching time forget itself. Those quiet mornings were my prayers. Unspoken, but deeply felt. But time has its own way of rearranging the furniture of your life. Melissa called 2 weeks after the funeral. Her voice was warm, rehearsed. She said the house was too lonely for me now. That her home in Madison had plenty of room. And wouldn't it be nice to have Sunday dinners again? She said things would feel more alive. As if grief was just a decorating problem. I wanted to say no. But I also wanted not to eat alone anymore. So I said yes. The day I packed, I folded Walter's favorite flannel shirt and tucked it between my books. I paused in the kitchen, touched the handle of the oven, where he used to sneak cinnamon rolls at midnight. I left the cupboard open, where we kept the tea canisters. The one labeled chamomile was nearly empty. That made me smile. The lake shimmered outside the window, like it was trying to remember something, too. I left a note on the counter. For whoever might visit after me. Take only what you need, but be kind to the house. It remembers. Melissa was waiting in the driveway, her SUV humming with impatience. She didn't get out. I loaded my own bags. As we pulled away, I looked back once, Not at the house, but at the chimney. It still leaned slightly to the left. Just like Walter's smile. And for a moment, I wasn't sure which one I was mourning more. Melissa's house was modern, spotless, and cold. Not in temperature, but in the way silence lived there. Not like an old friend, but like a hallway that never echoed back your steps. The walls were a shade of soft gray. Too soft to offend. Too dull to remember. There were no creaks in the floorboards. No scent of cinnamon in the air. Only that faint, metallic tang of lemon disinfectant. She led me to the guest room. A space so precise. It felt like walking into a furniture catalog. Everything matched. Nothing belonged. There was a framed quote on the wall. "Gratitude turns what we have into enough." I stared at it for a long time that night. Enough for whom? The bed was firmer than mine by the lake. The sheets smelled of fabric softener lavender again. But not the kind I used. This one felt artificial. Like someone trying too hard to smell like peace. Melissa knocked on my door the next morning. She smiled brightly. "Hope you slept okay, Mom. We have almond milk now. I know dairy doesn't sit well with you anymore." I nodded. The almond milk wasn't the problem. The silence was. At breakfast, I sat at a kitchen island that looked like it had never known spilled coffee or children's laughter. Her husband, David, offered a polite morning before disappearing behind a glowing laptop. Their daughter, Ava, scrolled through her phone while chewing half a slice of toast. No one asked me about the lake. No one asked if I missed Walter. So I asked about the weather. That night, I unpacked slowly. I placed Walter's flannel shirt in the closet, next to rows of minimalist dresses in cool beige tones. It looked out of place. I almost folded it back into the suitcase. But I left it there. I opened the book I'd brought and I'd read a dozen times, and ran my fingers over the yellowed pages. The words were the same, but they felt lonelier here. I missed the way the wind off the lake used to nudge the curtains. Here, the windows didn't even open. I missed the way Walter would hum when he chopped onions. Here, the kitchen made no sound. Even the refrigerator whispered. I sat on the edge of the bed, cradling a cup of chamomile tea. It tasted different in this house. Like the warmth had been filtered out. And for the first time since I'd said yes to Melissa's invitation, I began to wonder if I had mistaken loneliness for hope. Over the next few days, I tried to be helpful. I offered to do the dishes after dinner. Melissa smiled tight and polite. "No need, Mom. We have a dishwasher. Just relax, okay?" So I sat with my tea and watched. Watched her rinse a plate that didn't need rinsing. Watched her slide it into a sleek machine that hummed like a secret. Watched her close the door, like sealing something away. Once, I folded a blanket on the couch. Ava unfolded it right after and said, "Grandma, we like it draped for texture. That's just our style." Their style. It had no space for hands that remembered scrubbing, or eyes that saw meaning in worn corners. I understood. I did. They had built a rhythm without me, and I was the offbeat. I tried walking outside one afternoon. The backyard was manicured, but the trees stood too still. No birds. No breeze. Just the faint buzz of a distant mower. I missed the messiness of real things. The garden Walter kept, where tomatoes grew crooked and proud, where weeds crept in like stubborn memories. But we let them stay. That night, I heard Melissa talking to David in the kitchen. "I think we should move Mom's tea things. They're not dishwasher safe." Her voice wasn't cruel. Just calculated. The next morning, the small tray I'd left on the counter, with my teacup, my little tin of honey, and the spoon with a bent handle, was gone. I found it in the cabinet above the fridge. Too high for my reach. Melissa must have heard me dragging the chair over. She came in, adjusting her watch. "Mom, you don't need to keep things out. This isn't the lake house." That was the first time she'd said it aloud. I said nothing. But I looked at her. And in that moment I knew. She'd already moved me in her mind. From guest to misplaced item. Something kept for sentiment. Stored safely out of sight. That night, I sat by the window, cradling a mug I didn't like, drinking a tea that didn't taste like home. I watched the streetlights flicker in a rhythm I didn't know, and wondered, if you're no longer needed, but not quite forgotten, what does that make you? It started small. A shift so quiet, it could be mistaken for forgetfulness. One morning, I came into the kitchen and found only 3 plates on the table. Melissa looked up, confused for half a second. Then she smiled too brightly. "Oh, sorry, Mom. I thought you were still sleeping." I wasn't. I'd been awake since dawn, folding laundry that didn't belong to me. She poured me coffee, but it was already cold. No one noticed. Later that week, I overheard Ava planning her birthday dinner. They were thinking Italian. David suggested a reservation downtown. Melissa nodded. Then said, "Just us 4, it'll be easier." Us 4. I waited. Waited for her to glance my way. To say, "But of course, Mom, you'll come too." She never did. That night, I opened the drawer in the hallway console, where I used to keep greeting cards and wrapping paper. Everything was gone. In its place, neatly stacked charger cables and batteries. Efficient. Sanitized. My handwriting didn't live in that drawer anymore. I returned to my room and stared at the unopened box of my things still tucked in the corner. I had unpacked the flannel and the tea, but the rest? Still waiting for permission to belong. The next morning, Melissa passed me a grocery list. "Could you get these while we're at work, Mom? Use the card ending in 94. It's for house stuff." I took the list. 4 items. All brands I didn't recognize. Nothing I would ever eat. Still, I went. Because moving through stores meant moving through something. At least the cashier smiled. "Need help out, ma'am?" That felt more like home than Melissa's voice did lately. When I got back, I reached for the ceramic bowl I'd brought from the lake house. The one with the blue rim Walter chipped on Thanksgiving, years ago. It wasn't in the cupboard. I found it on top of the fridge, next to a bottle of apple cider vinegar and an old fondue set. Melissa must have moved it. Too old, too worn, too mismatched. Too much me. I left it there. That night, I skipped dinner. No one came to ask. The house was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest. The kind that makes you forget what your own voice sounds like. Sunday came. Melissa was cooking, or rather, instructing Ava on how to sauté zucchini just until golden. I stood nearby, watching the olive oil shimmer in the pan. Old instincts stirred. "Do you want me to help?" Melissa didn't look up. "Oh, Mom, this is our thing now, right, Ava?" Ava gave a half smile. Girls' kitchen day. I stepped back. I wasn't a girl. I wasn't theirs. So I sat at the edge of the dining room, pretending to read a book I couldn't focus on. I could still smell the garlic. Still hear the scrape of the spatula on the pan I once used to make Sunday brunch for an entire neighborhood. Later that afternoon, Melissa brought out a box. It was plastic, with pastel labels, neat, efficient. "I thought we could declutter a bit, Mom. This room needs more light. And, well, some of your things are a bit much for our aesthetic." Our aesthetic. She pulled out a shawl I draped over the chair. Then a floral tin of sewing notions. Then a faded cookbook, my mother's handwriting on every page. Each item removed so gently, as if the softness could mask the violence of it. "I'm just putting these in storage," she added. Before I could speak, I didn't stop her. Because how do you fight for space in a home where your breath already feels like too much? That night, I walked past the living room. They were all curled up watching a movie. Laughter spilled out into the hallway like warmth I wasn't allowed to touch. There were only 3 spots on the couch, and 3 people. I made tea. Quietly. In the kitchen light, no one turned off for me. As I passed the hall mirror, I caught my own reflection. Faint. Blurred by the angle. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman holding the mug. She looked suspended. Not in time, but in someone else's idea of what time should look like. Even the family photos on the sideboard had changed. Ava's graduation. David's parents visiting from out of state. Melissa's birthday brunch at the vineyard. All framed. All glossy. All recent. None with me in them. I looked for one, just one where my hand rested on a shoulder, or my smile peeked from behind a cake. Nothing. And it occurred to me. You don't have to throw someone out to erase them. Sometimes, you just stop including them. The invitation came on a Wednesday. Or rather, it didn't. I only knew about Ava's birthday dinner because I overheard her talking to a friend on speakerphone. We got a reservation at that little place on Monroe. Just family. Just family. That phrase again. Like a lock turning quietly on the inside of a door I once had the key to. At dinner, no one mentioned the plan. Not Melissa. Not David. Not even Ava, who kissed me on the cheek that morning and said, "Don't wait up tonight, Grandma." They all left around 6. David wore a blazer. Melissa wore perfume that reminded me of lilies. Ava wore the necklace I gave her when she turned 15. She didn't remember where it came from. I stood by the window and watched the car pull out of the driveway, its taillights blinking red. Like a warning I was too tired to heed. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't just silence. It was vacancy. I heated a bowl of leftover soup and sat at the dining table alone. There were still 4 chairs. But somehow, it felt like 3 was the new number. I remembered another birthday. Ava's 7th. Back at the lake house. I'd baked a strawberry cake with real whipped cream. Walter strung balloons from the porch to the swing set. Melissa had forgotten to buy candles, so I cut slivers of carrot and lit the tips. Ava thought it was magic. That night, she said I was the queen of birthdays. I wondered when I was quietly dethroned. Later, I walked down the hallway and paused outside Melissa's room. Not to eavesdrop, just to feel, for a moment, like I still existed on the other side of a door. But all I heard was laughter, coming from the living room speaker. Not mine. I turned off the light in the hallway. No one noticed. I sat at the edge of the guest bed, hands folded, staring at my packed suitcase in the corner. It had stayed there for weeks now, unmoved, like a question no one wanted to answer. I thought of the blue-rimmed bowl again. How it had once been part of every family meal. Now it lived above the fridge, covered in dust. Like me. Would you beg for a place at their table? Or would you protect your own pride? It began with a letter. Just a plain white envelope, tucked among grocery ads and coupons for nail salons I'd never visit. But the return address caught my eye. Geneva County Property Office. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, expecting maybe a notice about maintenance or taxes I had forgotten. But it wasn't about taxes. It was about transfer of ownership. And my name was still on it. Alone. I read the line again. Deed holder, Marjorie Lane. Current status, unencumbered. Unencumbered. The word felt strange, like something I hadn't been in years. No mortgage. No lien. No co-signature. Just me. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, letter in hand. As the evening light turned the room, the color of unspoken things. They hadn't asked me to sell. Hadn't even brought it up. But now it made sense. The way Melissa's tone changed whenever the lake house was mentioned. Too far to keep up, Mom. Maybe we should let it go. Someone could get hurt on those old stairs. She never asked if I wanted to keep it. Just assumed I wouldn't. Like she was slowly erasing me from every page of my own life story. I walked to the kitchen, clutching the letter like a splinter. Melissa was stirring something in a pot. She glanced up. "You okay, Mom? You look pale." "I got mail about the lake house." She blinked, then smiled quick and tight. "Oh? Probably just junk. You know how counties send out weird things sometimes." Her voice was light. Too light. I said nothing more. Just nodded. But I saw it. The way her hand froze mid-stir for half a second. The way her shoulders dropped. Just slightly. When I didn't press. I went back to my room. And opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand. Inside. A copy of the original deed. Folded carefully. Signed by both Walter and me, 1981. I ran my hand over the paper. Faint ink. A smudge where Walter's hand had shaken. It was ours. Still is. I folded it back. With the kind of reverence reserved for old photographs or folded flags. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the word unencumbered. Like a bell far off in the fog. Not a threat. Not yet. But a warning. One I intended to listen to. A few days later, I passed the study and heard Melissa on the phone. Her voice was low. The kind she used when talking to customer service or delivery men. But something in her tone made me pause. "Yes, the Geneva property. Yes, I understand it's still under her name. We're exploring options." I stood still. Breath held. Not spying. Just listening to what no one was telling me. She closed the door a moment later. When she saw me in the hallway, her expression didn't falter. "Just dealing with some household stuff," she said. "Nothing to worry about." But her smile was tight. Her eyes too quick to look away. That night, I checked the drawer where I kept my bank mail. There was a new statement. Different logo. A new financial service one I hadn't signed up for. I unfolded it carefully. The numbers were familiar. The account was mine. But the mailing address had been changed. To theirs. To this house. To Melissa's name, listed as secondary contact. Without my knowledge. I stared at it. Trying to recall if I had signed anything. Anything at all. Nothing came. Only the image of her passing me papers weeks ago at the kitchen table. "Just for emergency medical authorization," she'd said. Standard stuff. I had trusted her. My own daughter. I thought she was protecting me. Instead, she was preparing to replace me. I gripped the edge of the table. Heart pounding. Not from anger. But from a cold, familiar clarity. I had seen this before. In books. In stories. In widows who trusted too much. And vanished quietly into side rooms and nursing homes. This was how it began. Not with shouting. Not with courtrooms or signatures forced. But with silence. Smiles. Convenient paperwork. I returned to my room. And opened the cedar box Walter had built me. Inside were old tax records. Copies of utility bills from the lake house. Every document still in my name. Still intact. Still proof that I had not lost my place in this world. Not yet. But I could feel it. Like the lake in winter. Creaking beneath the surface. Change was coming. And it was wearing the face. Of someone I had once rocked to sleep. That Sunday, Melissa asked me to sit with her in the living room. She had a folder in her lap. Manila, clean edges. Not yet opened. "I've been thinking," she began. And already I knew it wouldn't be about dinner plans. "You're getting older, Mom. And I just want to make sure things are simplified. In case anything happens." She opened the folder. A printed document sat neatly on top. Transfer of ownership form. My name at the top. Blank line at the bottom. "I spoke to someone at the county office," she said. "They said it would make things smoother if your name was updated." Updated. As if I were a typo. Updated to what? I asked quietly. She cleared her throat. "Well, to me. Or jointly. Whatever you prefer." Her voice was calm. Practiced. As if this was a kindness. As if she were offering to carry a heavy bag I could no longer hold. But I hadn't asked her to. I didn't know the house needed updating, I said. Melissa looked up. Eyes flickering. It's just paper, Mom. It doesn't change anything. But it did. Because once you hand over your name, your place follows. Your right to return. To say no. To remember out loud. I looked down at the form. The space for my signature stared back at me like a cliff edge. I'll think about it, I said. She smiled. Too quickly. That night, I took the document to my room. And laid it on the desk. I didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. I simply wrote, in my own handwriting, across the signature line. Not yet. And tucked it back into the folder. In the morning, I left it on her desk. Exactly where she had placed it. No note. No explanation. Just the truth written in ink. Later that day, I passed her in the hallway. She didn't say anything. Just glanced at me, then looked away. But I saw it. The flicker of something between confusion and recognition. That maybe I wasn't as quiet as she thought. That maybe I still remembered how to protect something. Even if that something was just a name on a deed. A name is not just letters on paper. It's the last thing they can't take without you saying yes. If your own child asks for your signature, but not your voice, what are they really asking for? The suitcase had been packed for weeks. Not out of fear. Not even out of readiness. Just habit. Like leaving your shoes by the door. In case someone remembers to ask you to walk with them. No one had. It was Melissa's comment at breakfast that morning that pushed the last quiet domino. I think Ava needs the guest room back. She's got exams coming, and space really helps her focus. She didn't look at me when she said it. She buttered toast instead. David nodded. Ava didn't say a word. I didn't ask where they thought I would go. They didn't offer. The silence in the room filled in the blanks for them. Later that afternoon, I folded the flannel shirt again. For the last time. I took my tea tin, my mother's cookbook, the blue-rimmed bowl. I left the rest. Melissa was out. Ava was napping. David had retreated to his office. No one stood at the door. No one asked, "Where are you going, Mom?" So I didn't answer. I stepped into the spring sunlight. With a bag in one hand, and my breath in the other. Norma opened the door before I knocked. She had always been that way. One step ahead of whatever pain was trying to stay polite. Her home smelled of lemon verbena. And something baking. Or maybe that was just warmth. Real warmth. We didn't talk right away. She just put the kettle on. And laid a wool blanket over my shoulders. Like I was something worth saving. I sat in the spare room that night. On a mattress softer than guilt. But firmer than regret. The room was lined with books. Old paperbacks. Most of them dog-eared. Filled with forgotten heroes and second chances. I didn't cry. Tears would have felt performative. Instead, I traced the wood grain on the nightstand. And let the silence settle. Not the sterile hush of Melissa's house. But the soft quiet of a place that didn't need to erase itself to feel modern. Norma knocked gently before bed. She handed me a mug of something herbal. And kissed the top of my head. "You're not a burden," she said. It was the kind of sentence that didn't need a reply. Only remembrance. I lay down fully clothed. Just in case. And stared at the ceiling. Until it blurred into every night I'd spent convincing myself I was lucky. That being tolerated was close enough to being loved. But that night, I stopped pretending. Because even the wallpaper in Norma's guest room held more space for me than my daughter ever had. In the morning, the light filtered through lace curtains. Like kindness without a reason. Norma had left a note by the kettle. "Help yourself. There's honey in the blue jar. Make today gentle." I stood in the small kitchen, where every drawer had labels made from her handwriting. Even the sugar jar wore a crocheted cozy. It felt like being trusted, even without explanation. I made tea and carried it to the back porch. The chair creaked as I sat. Not from weakness, but memory. That sound was familiar, welcoming. A whisper that said, "You're still here." I watched sparrows gather beneath the hydrangea bush. They fought over crumbs like siblings at a dinner table. I smiled, then stopped myself. Not out of pain, but habit. It had been a while since joy didn't feel like trespassing. I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders and let the mug warm both my hands and the parts of me I had forgotten. I thought of Walter. How he used to say, "The world doesn't shrink when you age. It's just that fewer people ask what you're thinking." He was right. And I had let the silence wrap too tightly. Let the accommodations become expectation. Let the removals feel like reason. Melissa hadn't kicked me out. No one ever said the words. But what they did say, and more importantly, what they didn't, was enough to send me packing. That was the cruelty of it. Not the theft, but the suggestion that I was no longer worth consulting. No longer someone with ownership over anything. Not even my place at the table. Not even the version of me I carried in my chest. Like an heirloom too fragile for display. I looked out over Norma's backyard. A clothesline danced in the wind, carrying dresses that still remembered movement. A birdhouse leaned slightly to the left, paint peeling, but still occupied. Still useful. I thought about the blue-rimmed bowl. How Melissa had tucked it out of reach. Above the fridge. Out of sight. How I, too, had been repositioned. Not thrown out. Just stored. For safekeeping, they might say. But safekeeping for what? To be remembered when convenient? To be touched when sentimental? To be summoned when needed, but never fully seen? I finished the tea and let the last sip sit on my tongue, like a goodbye I hadn't said yet. Then I stood and folded the shawl over my arm. It was time to decide whether I would spend the rest of my life waiting to be invited back, or whether I would begin again, on my own terms. When you lose everything you've ever known, do you still have yourself? Norma had a garden. Not just the kind with roses and trimmed hedges, but a garden that breathed. Mismatched pots, vines that dared to climb over fences, wild mint creeping between bricks. She called it organized chaos. I called it freedom. That morning, I followed her outside, still holding my tea. The sun hadn't fully warmed the ground yet, and my slippers caught dew with every step. She bent over a patch of lavender and clipped just enough to dry for tea. "You can take some if you want," she said. "I don't have anywhere to put it," I replied, too quickly. She didn't push, just smiled, and went back to her rhythm. But something in me stirred. The smell of crushed lavender in her palm, sharp, sweet, unpretentious, dragged something up from my chest. Not pain. Memory. Of Walter. Of the time we planted a maple tree at the edge of the lake house. Just because the soil felt ready. He had dug with his bare hands. I brought him lemonade, then sat beside him on the porch swing as we watched the roots take. "No one can rush a tree," he had said. "Or a woman," I had answered. We laughed. And now, standing in Norma's garden, I realized it had been years since I had thought of myself as something still growing. Melissa's world didn't have space for roots. Only smooth surfaces and efficient lighting. But here, with my feet cold and the sun crawling slowly up my spine, I remembered that I had planted things. I had watched things bloom. And I had not died with Walter. That realization didn't come as a roar. It came as breath. A steady inhale. A long, trembling exhale. I went back inside and opened my small suitcase again. This time, not to pack, but to touch. To unfold the corners of things I'd once considered old, and now saw as proof. Proof of presence. Of choices made. Of names signed willingly. I took out the deed to the lake house. smoothed the crease down the center. Read the lines again. Unencumbered. Sole holder. Marjorie Lane. That afternoon I called Ricky. He had once been a third grader in my library class. Now he was a real estate lawyer with laugh lines and a memory for names. Mrs. Lane? He said, surprised. It's just Marjorie now, I answered. But inside, I wasn't so sure. Because maybe, just maybe, I was becoming someone else entirely. Ricky arrived the next morning. Not in a pressed suit, but in khakis and a windbreaker that still smelled faintly of his dog. He brought coffee and a folder tucked under his arm. Like a man who had learned that paperwork can be both weapon and balm. We sat in Norma's dining room. She lit a candle without asking, and disappeared into the kitchen with a knowing glance. I remember this house, Ricky said, smiling. You used to keep a copy of Charlotte's Web by the front desk. I still have it, I replied. Though it smells more like time than paper now. He opened the folder. I opened mine. Two people meeting in the middle of memory. With ink, evidence, and something soft like resolve. This deed is valid, he said. No joint claim. No transfer request filed. It's yours. I nodded. I never signed anything, Ricky. Not really. And I want to make sure they can't do anything. He leaned forward. They can't. Not unless you let them. He said it simply. As if the most radical thing a woman could do after 70 was to believe she still had choices. I swallowed hard. What if I sold it? I asked. He didn't flinch. You'd be within your rights. You could even direct the funds to a trust. Or set terms they can't touch. A thought bloomed slowly. Not revenge. Not even defiance. Just the outline of a life. With boundaries. With a lock only I had the key to. I looked out the window. Norma was watering the basil. Sunlight caught the silver in her hair. Like threads of quiet glory. I don't want to be erased, I said. Ricky nodded. I don't think you ever could be. But we both knew that wasn't true. People get erased all the time. Softly, gently. Under the guise of care. That's what made it so dangerous. I'll need a few days, I said finally. To think. To be sure. Take them, he said, standing. But remember, Marjorie, your silence won't protect anyone anymore. Especially not you. He left a card on the table. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He hugged me. Not like a client. Not even like a former teacher. But like a woman who had just remembered. She still had weight in the world. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe it. That evening, I returned to the suitcase. But not to repack it. I opened it slowly. Like a letter from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Inside were remnants of a life I thought I'd left behind. A pressed flower between 2 pages of a recipe book. A handwritten note from Walter that simply read, "Let the pie cool before you cut it. Patience makes it sweeter." I smiled. And for the first time in weeks, it wasn't sad. Just real. I took out the photo album. The one Melissa said was too bulky for the living room shelf. The leather was cracked. Edges frayed like old questions. But the pages still turned like truth. There we were. Younger. Messier. Louder. Me in the garden. Covered in dirt and smiling like I owned the sun. Walter beside me. His hands rough, his eyes full. Ava, years ago, in my arms. Face sticky with jam and joy. I ran my finger along the edge of the image. Not to hold on. But to remind myself. I had been the center of something once. Not a relic. Not a helper. Not a placeholder for holiday guilt. A root. A beginning. I closed the album. And placed it on the table next to Ricky's card. Not as evidence. As promise. Then I wrote one line in my notebook. Begin again, on purpose. That night, I slept with the window open. Let the wind move through the curtains. Like a blessing that didn't ask for permission. And I dreamed of the lake. of the maple tree, of how things root deep even when no one's watching. And when I woke up, I knew not just what I had to do, but who I was when I did it. Still, Marjorie. Still standing. Still mine. If the world ever told you it was too late to start over, what would you say back? We'd love to hear your quiet strength, your second chance stories, in the comments below. Because healing begins when someone finally listens. You are not alone. I didn't tell Norma right away. Not because I didn't trust her, but because some decisions feel holier when they're kept in the quiet. A little longer. The morning after Ricky's visit, I sat with my tea and a yellow notepad. Not to journal, not to reminisce, to list what I still owned, what I still chose, what I still meant to do, before the world decided it had the final say. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What is mine?" And under it, the lake house, my name, my story. That was enough. I called Ricky again that afternoon. "I'd like to proceed," I said, my voice steady. "With the sale?" he asked. "With the decision." He understood. No one rushed me. No pressure. No tactics. Only clarity. Over the next few days, he sent forms for me to review. I read every word. Twice. I underlined phrases like, "seller's discretion," and "no familial claim." I highlighted the section where I could choose where the funds would go. And I chose. Not into Melissa's future. Not into Ava's tuition. But into something Walter and I used to talk about. On long walks by the lake. A little library, he once said. For women like you. The ones who give and give. And are asked to be grateful when they're allowed to stay. I named it the Second Act Fund. Not bold. Not flashy. But unmistakably mine. I wrote the mission statement in pen. To support women over 60 who still have more stories to write. It was the first time in months. My hand didn't tremble on the page. I didn't tell Melissa. Not yet. She still thought the house was dormant. That I was dormant. She didn't know. I had returned to my own story. And picked up the pen again. That night, Norma asked if I wanted to go into town the next day. Lunch and a little shopping? She smiled. I said yes. And I meant it. Because now, even the act of choosing a new scarf felt like reclaiming something. A place in the world. Not as a guest, but as a participant. Someone who didn't just make room for others, but built the rooms herself. In the quiet. On purpose. And with every box I ticked. Every dotted line I signed. I wasn't fading. I was forming. 3 days later, I returned to the lake house. Ricky met me there. He arrived a little early. Already standing under the maple tree. Walter and I had planted 4 decades ago. Its branches had thickened. Its shadow stretched farther than I remembered. Looks good for its age, he said. So do I replied. He laughed. But I meant it. We walked slowly to the front porch. I carried no luggage. Only my purse and a small envelope. With the final documents inside. The key still worked. It slid into the lock. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. The air smelled like wood. Like dust. Like a room that had been waiting without complaint. I stepped inside. There was no furniture left. Melissa had sent someone to tidy up months ago. But the floor still creaked. In the exact same place. The light still fell across the entryway. Like it always had at this hour. Ricky stood in silence. As I made one full circle through the house. I touched the wall. Where Ava's growth chart used to be. The faint lines were still there. If you knew where to look. I paused by the window. Where Walter had once taped a photograph of me in the snow. That photo was gone. But my smile in it still hovered in the glass. In the kitchen. I stood where I had taught Melissa to crack eggs without breaking the yolk. She'd been 7. And so proud of herself. I took a breath. Not to mourn. To remember why I was here. This is still yours, Mrs. Lane, Ricky said. I looked at him. Not for much longer. He opened the folder. Pages weighted. Ownership transfer. Trust documentation. Beneficiary terms. Clean. Precise. Unmistakable. He slid the pen across the counter. I took it. Signed. Not in hesitation. In authority. And when it was done, I didn't cry. Didn't take one last look over my shoulder. Instead, I stepped back onto the porch. And let the wind touch my face. Not as farewell. But as permission. We stood there for a while. 2 people. 2 timelines. Crossing for the last time in this place. Then Ricky spoke. I'll take care of the rest. I know you will, I said. He shook my hand. Do you want to leave through the front, he asked. Or the back? I smiled gently. I've already arrived somewhere else. And with that, I walked down the steps. Like a woman who wasn't losing something, but claiming the space she'd once forgotten to own. Norma was waiting on the porch. When I returned, she didn't ask how it went. Didn't ask if I'd changed my mind. She simply handed me a glass of lemonade. With too much pulp. And exactly the right amount of silence. We sat together. As the sun began to pull long shadows across her garden. The basil leaned east. The chimes rattled softly in the breeze. I rested the folder in my lap. It was heavier now. Not because of the paper. But because it held the absence. Of something I had loved once. And finally let go of. On my own terms. I signed it, I said after a while. Norma nodded. And do you feel smaller? Or taller? I smiled. Still measuring. She laughed. Then reached over. And placed a hand on mine. It was a small gesture. But it grounded me. I'm thinking of telling Melissa, I added. You don't owe her that. No, I said. But I owe myself the sound of my own voice. That night, I opened the notebook again. Same yellow paper. Same heading at the top. What is mine? I added a 4th line. The right to begin again. The next morning, I made breakfast for Norma. Toast. Jam. A soft-boiled egg in a chipped white cup. That looked like it had seen decades of gentle spoons. When she came into the kitchen, she paused. You laid the table like someone who remembers what that means. I do, I said. Because setting a table isn't just for food. It's a declaration. That someone belongs here. That the space is not empty. That time will be shared, not passed. Later that day, I walked to the post office by myself. The breeze was warm. The sidewalk uneven. But every step felt earned. I mailed a letter. No return address. Just Melissa's name. And inside, 2 things. A photo of the lake house. From the early days. With Ava in my arms and Walter behind the camera. And a note that said, some things are not yours to inherit. Some things must be built yourself. Then I slipped it into the box. And turned toward home. Not a place with my name on the deed. Not a house full of shared blood. But a place where I had laid claim to something rarer. My voice. My choice. And for the first time in a long time. My story. Melissa called 3 times. Before I picked up, I let the first 2 ring out. My thumb hovering over the screen. Like a question I'd already answered. The 3rd time, I answered with silence. Mom, she said. I got something from a lawyer today. Her voice cracked. Not with sorrow. But with confusion. I don't understand. You sold the lake house? Still, I said nothing. Let the weight of the question sit. Where her certainty used to be. You didn't tell me. You didn't even ask. Now I spoke. No one asked me, I said. It was quiet for a beat. Then she tried again. But that house, it was going to be part of. It was never yours, Melissa. She inhaled sharply. I just thought. We were keeping it in the family. You were keeping me out of it. Another silence. But this one wasn't mine. It belonged to her. To the part of her that had built an entire version of our relationship. On the assumption that I would always agree. Always yield. Always be grateful. I let the silence linger. Let it press into the cracks. She didn't know she'd made. Finally, she whispered. So what now? Now. I looked out the window. At Norma's garden. The mint had overtaken the parsley. Nothing asked permission to grow here. I'm writing a new chapter, I said. It doesn't have a place for regret. Or inheritance. She didn't answer. The line stayed open. Long enough for me to hear. The breath she didn't know she was holding. Then I ended the call. No anger. No drama. Just closure. A few hours later, Ricky confirmed the sale had gone through. The buyer, a young couple from Milwaukee, had already sent photos of the lake at sunset. They planned to build a dock, hang wind chimes, maybe plant a second maple. I saved the photo. But not for nostalgia. For proof. That beginnings don't expire. Not with age. Not with loss. Not with being told, again and again. You've had your time. Because time doesn't run out. It reshapes. And sometimes, it calls your name back. After years of whispering it behind closed doors. 2 days later, Melissa showed up at Norma's house. Unannounced. She didn't knock right away. I saw her from the kitchen window. Standing on the porch. Wringing her hands like a child, rehearsing an apology. She wasn't ready to mean. When she finally knocked, I didn't answer. It was Norma who opened the door. Is she here? Melissa asked. Norma didn't move. Didn't call for me. She's resting, she said, calmly. Maybe come back when you're ready to listen. Instead of explain. Melissa hesitated. Then handed Norma a sealed envelope. Just give her this? Norma took it. Closed the door softly. Didn't lock it. But didn't reopen it either. Inside, I stood at the edge of the hallway. Watching it all. Like someone peering into their own past. And realizing they'd finally stepped out of it. Later, I opened the envelope. It wasn't a letter. Just a copy of an old photo. Me, Walter, and a toddler, Ava. On the lake dock. Someone had written on the back. I didn't mean for it to go this far. No name. No plea. No ownership. Just an echo. I placed it on the table. Beside the documents from Ricky. Confirming that the full sale had cleared. And the funds had already been deposited. Into the second act fund. I had also received a letter that morning. From a woman named Ruth. 64. Recently widowed. Who had applied for a micro-grant. To start a book club at her local senior center. Her handwriting was shaky. But proud. I didn't think anyone cared about women like us. She wrote. But now I do. I folded her letter with more care than I'd ever given to any estate plan. This was the legacy I'd chosen. Not marble plaques. Or family heirlooms passed in guilt. But proof that dignity does not belong to the young. Or the loud. Or the ones who think silence is consent. That afternoon, I walked to the post office again. Sent Ruth a note and a check. Tucked into it a quote from Charlotte's Web. I remembered reading to Ricky when he was 9. You have been my friend. That in itself is a tremendous thing. No one saw me mail it. No applause. No parade. Just the sound of the metal box closing. Like the final page of a chapter. You didn't realize you had the courage to finish. The meeting took place in Ricky's office. Neutral ground. Melissa arrived first. Dressed in beige. Like she was trying to disappear into the walls. David came too. Hovering just behind her. Like a man caught between damage control and disbelief. I entered last. No fanfare. Just my step, steady. My spine, straighter than it had been in years. Ricky greeted each of us, then opened a manila folder. I've asked you here to clarify the outcome of the recent property sale, he said. Melissa shifted. I just don't understand, she began. How all this could happen without a conversation. It did, I replied. Just not the one you were prepared for. She blinked. Ricky continued. Professional. Poised. The property known as 1128 Willow Shore Lane has been legally sold to the Randall family. The sale was executed under sole ownership authority. He paused. No beneficiaries have been named from the family. All proceeds were placed into a private legacy trust, founded and directed by Mrs. Marjorie Lane. Melissa stared at the table. David looked at her, then at me. But no one said a word. Ricky closed the folder. Silence. Not the passive kind. Not the awkward kind. But the kind that rearranges a room. That hangs like a verdict no one dares appeal. Then I spoke. My name was the only thing left that hadn't been negotiated. I chose to make it mean something. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Ricky stood. I believe that concludes our business. I rose, calmly, gathered my shawl, tucked the copy of the trust papers into my purse. As I reached the door, Melissa said softly, So this is it? I turned back. Not harsh, just true. No. This is mine. And I walked out. Not with vengeance. Not with regret. But with the sound of my own footsteps finally echoing. That night, I returned to Norma's, to the smell of lentil soup and wildflowers on the table. I sat across from her, as the evening light turned everything gold. No more questions. No more waiting. Just this. Just peace. Is this justice, or is it too harsh? What would you have done? The apartment was small. One bedroom, an old radiator that hissed in the morning, and a window that faced west. So the light came late but stayed long. I chose it myself. Signed the lease. Paid the deposit. Hung the key on a nail by the door. There was no guest room. No granite countertops. No smart appliances. Just a table for two. A teapot that sang softly when ready. And a bookshelf that didn't judge what I chose to keep. Norma helped me move in. We didn't rush. She wrapped my blue-rimmed bowl in 2 scarves, placed it gently between cookbooks, and the shawl I no longer needed to wear out of defense. You could paint, she said, glancing at the bare walls. I could, I replied. But I didn't. Not yet. I liked the space. It reminded me that blankness doesn't always mean something's missing. Sometimes, it's permission. The first night, I lit a candle. No scent. Just flame. Sat on the floor, barefoot, drinking chamomile tea from a mismatched mug I'd found at a thrift store, with a chip on the rim and a message inside. You're still here. I ran my finger along the chip. Not to fix it, but to remember that wholeness doesn't require perfection. Outside, a train passed. Distant. Steady. I didn't flinch. That was new. The next morning, I walked to the market, picked out lemons, and tulips, and a postcard that said, You are exactly where you need to be. I pinned it beside the kitchen window, with a clothespin I brought from the lake house. Some things come with you, even when you don't mean to pack them. Later that week, I hosted tea for 2 women from the neighborhood. Widows. Writers. One had started a blog at 72. The other, a quilting circle. We didn't talk about pain. We didn't need to. It sat respectfully in the corner. Quiet. Acknowledged. But no longer in charge. They brought muffins and honey. And when they left, one of them said, It feels good here. And it did. Not because it was beautiful, but because nothing in it was borrowed. Every object had been chosen. Every silence, mine to fill or keep. That night, I wrote a letter to Ruth to tell her the grant had been approved and ask if she'd like to co-host a virtual reading event. For the second act fund, I included a bookmark with pressed lavender from Norma's garden. And at the bottom, in my best handwriting, I added, "You matter. Not because someone says so, but because you do." I sealed the envelope, then stood by the open window. Outside, the city breathed. And I did too. 1 month later, I received a package. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Melissa's. Inside was a framed photo. The one I thought had disappeared. Me, Walter, and Ava by the lake. Walter's arm around my shoulder. My hand on Ava's knee. We looked sunburnt. And alive. Taped to the back was a note. Short and uneven. I kept this. I just didn't know how to give it back. There were no apologies. No justifications. Only the gesture. I placed it on the shelf, between a thrifted clock that didn't tick, and a bowl of dried lavender. Let it belong, without needing to forgive or forget. Some stories don't end in reunions. Some just quiet down. That afternoon, I took the long way home from the post office, stopped by the park, and watched a group of older women doing Tai Chi under a sycamore tree. They moved slowly, like water remembered in a vessel. One of them caught my eye, smiled, then returned to her breath. I sat on a bench and took out my notebook, wrote one sentence. Still here. Still mine. I thought of the word legacy, not as a thing to leave behind, but as something to live inside. A way of moving through the world, without asking for permission to take up space. Walter once told me, "You don't need to carve your name in stone. Just let your choices echo." I hear them now. In the laughter of a widow learning to code. In a grant that helped publish someone's first poem at 68. In the silence of a tea-stained room that doesn't apologize for being quiet. My story was never about revenge. It was about return. Not to a place, but to a self. Too long postponed. Now, I plant herbs on the windowsill. Keep jam in a glass jar. Leave the radio on sometimes. Even when I'm not listening. Because presence isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the sound of a kettle beginning to hum. In a home you chose. On a day that asked nothing of you, except to be awake. This is not a second chance. It's a continuation. And if you're reading this, or hearing this, and wondering if your voice still matters, it does. It always has. Even when no one hears it. Even when it shakes. Even when you've forgotten how it used to sound. Let this be your reminder. You are not an afterthought. You are a beginning still unfolding. The afternoon sun warms the pages of the old book in my lap. I've learned that peace isn't about winning. It's about no longer needing to prove anything. What does healing look like for you? What does legacy mean in your own life? We invite you to share your story below. You are not alone in your journey. Your voice is welcome here. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.